recording. And if you ever get to something that, you want to try another run at again, or you're not happy with how it turned out, we can always put in a few seconds of dead space and then take another run at it. So it's the beauty of editing. So,
Perfect.
never feel afraid to say, you know what, I'm not sure I'm happy with that, or what have you. So everything is everything is nice and redoable. So so what we'll do is I'll start off, to kind of introduce you. I'm not going to have much to say in the beginning because I haven't had a chance to play the game yet. And then I'll kind of turn it over to you, and we'll just kind of have a nice conversation about it, hopefully. And I like to kind of keep things pretty unscripted. So if that's okay with you, we'll get started.
Sounds perfect.
All right, great. So here we go. In 3, 2. Hello and welcome to The Long View, a podcast that takes a closer look at the games people play. The Long View is a proud member of Punchboard Media. Please be sure to go out and check out all of the great sister podcasts and content creators at Punchboard Media. It's a fantastic organization of people, and they share their views about board games and reviews in the industry. Go check out Punchboard Media if you haven't had a chance yet. My name is Jeff Gamble. I'm the host of The Long View, and today I am very pleased to be joined by a first-time contributor who reached out and asked if he could talk about the game Blood Rage. And now this is a game that I have not played, but that has never stopped me from talking about a game before. I just lean on my guest a little bit more. And so Miguel was nice enough to reach out and say, hey, I listened to your year-long retrospective episode, The Long View of 18 and 20, and you talked a little bit about Blood Rage, but neither you nor the guest you had on really knew it, and you kind of compared it to Rising Sun. You kind of compared it to Blood Rage, and the two of them really aren't all that similar. And Rising Sun is a great game, and so I'd love to talk about it. So I was really grateful that he reached out so that he could tell me why Steve and I were so wrong about Rising Sun, and it's not the same thing as Blood Rage. And so I wanted to say hello, Miguel, and welcome to the show, and thanks for agreeing to be on.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, not a problem at all. It's people who write in like you and, say they want to talk about one of their favorite games that keeps the show going. So it's I that should be thanking you. So thanks for coming on today and talking about the game. Let me make sure here so that everybody knows where to find you. Your last name, could you kind of give your last name for us too, Miguel? Because I didn't want to butcher it.
Sure thing. My last name is P for Paul, Acheco.
So are we going with Pacheco or
Pacheco? Yeah,
Pacheco.
Portuguese.
See, I knew I would butcher it if I tried to say it. And where can people find you on the internet, Miguel, if they're interested in, maybe seeing what other kind of games you like? Do you have a BGG account?
Yeah, I do. It's El Palazzo, I think, is what I am on BGG. I have to double check that, but it's ILPALAZO. And then it's just under my name as well, Miguel Pacheco. I'm on there.
Excellent. Well, thanks for letting us know there. So you said that you have had quite a lot of experience with this game of Blood Rage and also Rising Sun.
Yeah.
Now, you've played both, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so Rising Sun is the one that came out after Blood Rage. And you also, before we started recording, sort of brought up the lineage of Chaos in the Old World as well. And so we might be able to chat about that and sort of the sort of differences between those games. And Rising Sun came out in 2018, and the designer of the game is Eric Lang. It's currently rated 7.9, so that's a super respectable rating for a game. Anything in the high 7s or 8s, of course, is fantastic. And the game came out a while ago. And so that means that, this isn't just the initial sort of blush of reviews of people who were super enthused about it. This game has been around a while, and it's had over 13,000 ratings. And so it seems like that this game has got some legs. And so I never had a chance to play it. And that's why I was grateful that you reached out. So what can you tell us about your experience with Rising Sun? Like, how did you first get interested in this game?
So I knew Eric Lang's designs already from Chaos in the Old World. And really, I think his pedigree and his kind of approach to these kinds of dudes on a map game, like let's call them, started with, he had a game actually before Chaos, if I'm not mistaken. But Chaos in the Old World is kind of the one that put him on the map because it's a little bit of a hybrid of kind of Euro sensibilities with a lot of thematic kind of Western style or Ameritrash games, if we're going to use that term. But then he had before Blood Rage, there was a game that I think I forget the name now, but there's a game that came before Blood Rage that he kind of evolved to become the Blood Rage that we all know and love now.
That game was Midgard. It was a Z-Man game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of knew about that game, but then of course Blood Rage was the big one, and it was kind of, I think, probably one of CMON's first big Kickstarters. I think there was Zombicide and Blood Rage and all those at around that same era. But certainly, I think the first Eric Lang CMON big design that came out. Now, I didn't back that Kickstarter, but I knew Blood Rage by reputation. And when I tried it out, I mean, that combination of drafting, card drafting, and area control, I just found it very compelling. It's a very fun, easy to grasp game. And so when Rising Sun came out, I thought the theme was great. Obviously, the CMON Chrome on it was always appealing if you collect minis and all that kind of stuff. I'm not a huge, I'm in it for the gameplay, and I gravitate very much towards kind of more confrontational area control style designs. And Eric Lang does a really good job of putting interesting spins on it. And so as soon as it came up on Kickstarter and taking a quick look at it, it was immediately compelling to me. And I backed it. I was pretty much an all-in backer. The only thing I didn't get was, which I ended up regretting a little bit, was one of the expansions, the Dynasty Invasion expansions, because in classic CMON fashion, you could get an extra special thing if you backed it on Kickstarter. One of the strongholds was you could have had the plastic stronghold if you backed it. But I got everything else pretty much. And it's a very interesting design. I think very much unlike a lot of the other stuff he's done in the past. And I think there is, as we were discussing previously, a few misconceptions about what Blood Rage is or isn't. Sorry, what Rising Sun is or isn't.
Wait, that's okay. I did that myself a couple of times already. So, and again, it's interesting because they do superficially look a whole lot alike. You know, they tend to kind of fall into that dudes on a map territory. They are, very highly interactive. They've got the big, gorgeous, beautiful minis, that I've seen some people paint, and they look absolutely fantastic. Yeah. I never got that into it, but just absolutely gorgeous pieces. And you're right. I mean, Eric Lang has kind of built his design in many ways around this sort of hybridization of Euro mechanics with a very in-your-face interactive themes. I'm also thinking about he did a Godfather game that also was designed by him that was actually quite good. I mean, I played it and enjoyed it, and it had some fun little kind of blinged out pieces in the case of like little suitcases that you had that you stored your ill-gotten gains in and all that. And again, it was like really interactive, very much area control, seems to be a design sort of choice that he's very comfortable with from a mechanism standpoint.
Right.
And, again, like you said, there's all of those expansions, which Blood Rage had too. It had all of the different sorts of expansion packs and miniatures and extra creatures and whatnot that you can still find on the secondary market. And Rising Sun was kind of the same is what I'm hearing you telling me. Like there's the base game, and then there was all this extra content that you could get. And, that's... I think that, like you said, very aptly, that follows CMON's kind of business model. They did the same thing with Zombicide. There's always this extra content you can get, and people are kind of... I think some people are just going to kind of be all in on it, and other people are going to be like, well, I want to see if I like the game first, and if I really like the game, then I'll go and get that stuff. But by that time, it's like in the secondary market, and it's crazy expensive, and sometimes you can't get it or it's not available. All right. If all of these games, whether we're talking about Chaos in the Old World or Blood Rage or Rising Sun or Godfather, Corleone's Empire, if they all share this idea of the interactivity and to some extent the area control, I guess what I'm really curious about is what is it that you feel differentiates, in particular, since that was our topic, Blood Rage and Rising Sun? And before we kind of start picking at that, can you maybe give like a high-level overview, Miguel, of what exactly, how does the game play? What are the sort of basic mechanisms? Kind of give us the elevator pitch for how you play Rising Sun. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do my best here. So in Rising Sun, which is set in like a very, I want to stress this, very fantasy feudal Japan, because there's been a couple of controversies about the provenance of and some of the liberties taken with the world in which Rising Sun takes place. You are leading your clan to victory through accumulating victory points. Now, this right here is one of the first things that separates, I guess, this game. Well, you get victory points through control of areas, but kind of like Blood Rage, a lot of the combos that you find is really going to be the main engine that's going to propel you to victory with victory points. In fact, it's quite possible that you're very much in connection or even win with barely even controlling any territory or winning that many fights. But let's start at the beginning about how you actually go about this. So it's a game for, I guess, anywhere from 2 to 6 players with the expansions. I would never play this with 2. I think you'd really need 4 to really make the game shine. And that's because of the very first phase. So the game is divided roughly into 3 phases. The first phase is called the Alliance phase, I believe. And it's thematically a tea ceremony phase. What you're basically doing here, and there's actually very little rules overhead here. Basically, the way it works is each player has kind of a half of a yin-yang symbol in the color of their clan, right? So what you're doing is you're basically talking, bargaining, either with money or with future favors, and convincing another player to join forces with you and symbolically joining your yin-yang symbols. So in a game of 5 players, for example, so in that round, one player is going to be left out because you're just joining. It's pairs. You're always looking for pairs. And it's worth saying that the game is spread out over 3 rounds. Spring, summer, fall, and then I think winter is just a scoring phase, if I'm not mistaken. And so what you're doing is you're pairing up. And the reason why that's important is primarily because of the next phase that comes right after this. And this phase is really what differentiates, I think, Rising Sun from, say, Blood Rage or a lot of the other dudes on the map game. It is called the political phase or the political mandate phase. And at its core, I believe, I've never played this game, but it's very similar to Puerto Rico. It's an action selection mechanism. So what you have is a number of tiles that allow you to do the bulk of what you're going to do in this game. So you've got tiles like recruiting, you've got tiles like where you can build your stronghold, you got tiles for movement, you got tiles for going shopping, which is really where a lot of the basically it's called the marketplace, but you're going to go and shop.
Okay, all right. I was hoping they didn't call it go shopping. That would be one of the thematic problems, maybe.
Yeah, go to the mall. Go to the feudal mall. No, it's the marketplace phase. So you've got the marketplace phase, you've got a stronghold building phase, you've got a movement phase, and what happens is let's say I believe there's a big stack of these tiles. I think there's about 2 of each kind of mandate, and the game is spread out over. So each of these rounds, these political mandate rounds, have the way the cadence goes is you do 3 of these mandates, then there's a break. Then there's another 3 mandates, then there's a break, then there's a final 2 mandates, and then you go into what's called the battle phase. And so let's say there's 5 players, that means there's 3, 6, 7, 8 actions. The first 2 players then have the potential to have 2 actions, 2 mandates being fulfilled versus the other one. So that very much falls into play. And that's a built-in kind of balancing that you're going to have to account for, because imagine the first 2 players ally with each other. Now both of them get 2 actions. That's incredibly powerful in a game like this. And the way the game works is whoever selects the mandate gets a bigger benefit, but everybody else gets to do something as well, usually less powerful. So for example, if I'm not mistaken, let me just double check something here. So for example, if you're doing the marshalling phase, which is the phase in which you can build a stronghold, everybody else gets to move their characters, but you and your ally partner are the only ones that get to build stronghold. And those are pretty much the only way that you can put your forces out later on. So that can provide a greater numerical advantage from the battle phase. Another example, very simply, is the market phase, the purchasing phase. You get a discount of 1 gold for whatever it is you're buying. And that can be significant when certain things, some clans only start with 4 gold. So being able to save that money is quite important. So you're selecting these mandates. You choose 3. You draw 3. You choose 1. You put the other 2 back for the next person. Then grab 3. Choose 1. Blah, blah, blah. So you go around and you're fulfilling these kinds of mandates. And there's basically 2 arenas that you're trying to 2 landscapes in which you're trying to gain control over. One is the main map. And the game incentivizes you to collect sets. So different parts of Japan are broken down into different colors. And the game incentivizes you to collect different colors at the end of the game to then generate more points. The more sets of different colors you collect, the more VPs you'll get towards the end. So in that way, you're not just going to turtle in one area because there's less points for just securing the same area season after season. So you are going to be marshaling your forces in the landscape of Japan to then fight over during the battle phase. But there's also what's called the Kami phase. So remember I said this political mandate phase is split into 3, then a gap, and 3, then another gap, and 2. These gaps is where the second kind of area control element falls into place, and it's not insignificant at all. The game randomizes 4 gods at a time. I think you have a selection of maybe 6, if I'm not mistaken, perhaps 8. But you're going to set out these 4 god tiles at the top of the board, and they provide different benefits at any time. Either it's gaining money, or perhaps going to the marketplace by yourself, or gaining VPs for however many strongholds you have, for example, or moving your guys for free as a free action. And to do that, you need to send during the recruitment phase. If you take a recruitment mandate, you can send Shintos, which are thematically Japanese priests, Shinto priests, up to these gods. And then whoever has the most of these priests in there, the most power of these priests, gets to take that action, basically. So when you're doing the recruitment mandate, you've got to kind of figure out first, do I want to put a guy up there? Because sometimes you can only recruit up to the number of strongholds you have, basically. So if you only have 2 strongholds out, then is it 1 guy and 1 priest goes up, or am I just going to put 2 priests up or whatnot? Because again, you get to take that god action every time there's a break between those mandates. So that's 3 times per season. That can be quite powerful. So that's something that you're also playing against. The final, so then there's the final phase, and the final phase is it's the battle phase. And what you're doing then is in kind of region order, which is randomly set at the beginning of each season, you are going to be fighting different battles as long as your personnel is involved in that province. And this is done in a pretty unique way as well. It's similar to, are you familiar with a game called Cry Havoc?
No, I'm not, unfortunately.
That's another kind of, I've never played it myself, but from what I understand, it's a very similar type of bidding system in which you get to control, you get to kind of allot those coins that you've been saving up or earning through different methods. You then get to bid them behind a blind screen on different kind of actions you can take within that battlefield. And they are then resolved in order from left to right of what, and then so you remove your screen, and then you see whoever has the most money on each of these elements will get to execute that element solely themselves. So the first element is seppuku, which was a controversial thing that also happened when people were upset that element was included in there. But basically, you get to sacrifice your forces right off the bat. So if you do that, you get VP for each force for each element you sacrifice for each warrior, and you also go up in honor. Honor is primarily used to break ties in this game. So there's an honor tracker, and the more you go up, somebody else is going down. And breaking ties can happen quite a lot in this game. So again, it's something to keep in mind as you're shooting up in the honor ranks. But you can get a bunch of VPs just from killing your guys. Okay. Then second, then you can take somebody hostage. And this being a CMON game, there's giant monsters floating around all over the place with different powers. If you bid 1 gold on taking a hostage and the other person didn't, you get to take that monster hostage. It doesn't matter if it is not monster for monster or anything like that. You can just take that monster hostage, and they're out of the final assessment. The other thing you can do is put Ronins into play, which is a different kind of resource you can agglomerate. It just allows you to put in more power into the final assessment of who's going to win this battlefield. But to do that, you need to secure the right to put them into play by outbidding the other person. And then finally, there is a bid for gaining extra VPs for however many people died during this battle, including the people that committed suicide. You can get double the points if you put extra money in seppuku and extra money in, it's called the poets, the war poets that are thematically singing great deeds of the battle that took place. So after the first 3 before the war poets, you then calculate the remaining force in each of the that's in the battlefield, and whoever wins that gets the tile of that field. Everybody else, I think, is pretty much destroyed automatically, and you get to allot the VPs for whoever won the poets as well. And that's basically the game. So you do this kind of so after all these battlegrounds are kind of decided and allotted, and you get the tiles for those regions. You then start again from spring. You go into summer, and you go to another tea ceremony phase. You might break alliances. You might do a brand new alliance. You might keep the same person, perhaps, and into a new political mandate phase and a battlefield phase. And round we go until you get to the winter phase, and which is just a pure scoring element.
Well, thanks for giving the overview there. I actually feel like I have a pretty decent idea how to play the game, so you did an excellent job.
Good.
Yeah, to kind of pull at some things that I heard in there, it's interesting. The alliance system it sounds really interesting. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Martin Wallace's Struggle of Empires, where there is a sort of forced alliance system. Like there's going to be a bid in that game to see whose kind of alliance you're going to join, and a lot of times you're actually bidding to form an alliance with your biggest competitor or the person that you think is going to try and come and smack you around, because if they end up being your ally, they can't mess with you. And so that was like a really, really interesting system in Martin Wallace's game. And this kind of sounds like it has sort of the same features to it. It's different in that there's only going to be pairs that are made here. But that definitely is very different from Blood Rage, because there's no... It's kind of an every Viking for himself in Blood Rage.
Exactly.
There's not any of this sort of idea of cooperation. I think you're very apt when you talk about the sort of Puerto Rico style action selection, because it sounds exactly like Puerto Rico, because you have the main benefit and then the sort of nerfed benefit that everybody else gets to take. And the combos, if I'm understanding you correctly, there's almost the ability to kind of combo with your partner, because if I take an action where or a decree or whatever it was you called it that says that I can build strongholds, then my partner will also be able to do that. Yes?
Exactly. Yep.
And then my partner might be able to select the one that is going to let me put out troops, which means I'm also going to get to put out troops from the newly created strongholds. Is that correct?
Precisely, yeah.
Okay, so the ability to combo there, I think, really sounds fascinating, because you're going to have the chance to kind of plan together with your partner the different things that you might want to try to accomplish in the game, and you're both going to get the benefit from that, while the poor person who only has one thing and doesn't have a partner they're going to get a powerful effect that they're going to be able to do, but they're only going to be able to do it, once themselves, and they don't have a partner to work with. So that leads me to my first sort of real question of the game, as my dog barks like an idiot that hopefully isn't going to be picked up by the mic, which is, does this game have the sort of bash the leader sort of a feel? Because to me, it almost sounds like whoever it is that's in the lead, everybody is going to want to leave out of an alliance for exactly the reason I just described. And the other players are going to kind of conspire together and pair up so that they can sort of gain an advantage, gain a little bit more actions, and be able to do more, so that then they're going to catch up to the leader. Is that something, am I assessing that correctly, or is that just completely off base?
That is a very astute assessment. I do want to touch on a couple things. I'm going to answer that question. I want to touch on a couple things. One is that I think it's very important to note that alliance phase that I mentioned, the tea ceremony phase, it's one of the biggest, I'm not going to call it drawbacks, but one of the biggest kind of hurdles to overcome regarding this game, in that it's very fluid and very organic. There is no mechanism other than, hey, do you want to do this or not, to ally. And you're right. So there's no bids or formal bidding system or anything like that that's going to make a person, commit to allying with somebody else. It's just whatever they're feeling like, whatever the inherent player kind of negotiation element of it comes into play. I think this is kind of a hallmark. We're going to touch on this in a little bit. This is kind of a hallmark of Eric Lang's designs, not dissimilar to Cole Wehrle in a way, and that there's a lot of inherent player balancing that you're going to find in his games. This happens in Blood Rage, and this will happen here. And so you're absolutely right. To get to your question, once you play one game of this, you're going to quickly realize, or maybe even just one season of this, wait a minute, if I keep allying with the person in the lead, I'm just going to keep giving them more of these strong mandates, and I'm going to make a good thing better, and that's not necessarily good for me. So one of the first things I like to say, and I've played this game 15 times probably by now, one of the things I always like to say is, especially playing with new players, like, watch out. You may think that there'll be some great advantages to partnering with somebody who's strong right now, but in fact, you're just feeding them. Like there's no, it's very difficult if you're going to make that decision. It'll be very difficult to then balance in the long term and try to hold that person back from victory, simply because of the elements that they're just getting those extra mandates. And like I said in the beginning, one of the things you have to think about also is with 8 mandates being played out, who is getting 2 this season? Who are the 2 people that are getting 2? And those alliances come at a premium then. So you're trying to kind of, put some money put some skin in the game, so to speak, to try to ally with them, because they know that that for this season, their alliance is worth more than they would ever be otherwise.
Yeah, that definitely is an interesting way to kind of add almost a negotiation currency kind of to the game, and the currency being the extra actions that you're talking about, right? That ability to sort of extend your turn and if you want to think of it that way, by getting to do more things than the other players. So
Exactly.
it's definitely got a value. Are negotiations like binding in this game, or is it kind of a free for all? Like, hey, you can keep your word, you cannot keep your word. How does that work?
Good question. So they are pretty much non-binding. Of course, when you're changing money, you're going to change money here and there. But other than that, it is non-binding. And I did not mention that there's one mandate called Betray. The Betray mandate automatically breaks an alliance. What the Betray mandate does is, in a game where getting your forces out can be quite valuable and difficult to do, it allows you to replace 2 figures on the board with your own figures, like for like. So if it's a warrior, it's warrior for warrior. You can replace a monster for monster as well. It automatically breaks an alliance because it's such a powerful mandate. You don't even have to target your ally with it or not, although many people do. But that action will automatically break an alliance, and I believe will lose you some honor as well. But it's a very powerful action. But again, if you are riding solo, that's a very attractive action for you if you don't have an ally that phase, because that's going to be one of the most efficient actions you can take no matter what, especially if you only have one. The ability to remove two of your enemy's forces from the board, and at the same time, in essence, recruit 2 of your own is of great efficiency.
Yeah, I can see how that would be awfully tempting to let that pass up or pass you by, especially, as you said, if you're the lone player, because then you could use it to bust up a very effective alliance that 2 of your competitors have made. And, that might be able to slow them down as far as, them catching up to you as the leader. So, okay, that sounds awesome. Now, one of the things, I'm going to go back to Blood Rage only because that's kind of what I have experience with. One of the things in Blood Rage is that when there is a battle, when there's a fight, there's the opportunity to sort of have, for lack of a better term, troops that are in sort of bordering areas kind of jump in and join the fight and dogpile.
Right, they're called the battle.
Yeah, exactly. Is that also president? No, not president. Is that also present in Rising Sun? Because that is actually a mechanism that I was really fond of in the first one.
Absolutely not. It is not. And in fact, it's worth denoting that the marketplace that I'm talking about, that purchasing phase, really is at the heart of the powers and what you're going to do in Rising Sun. And some of the asymmetry of powers is going to develop. And each clan is asymmetric. They all have different powers, including some very crazy powers. There's one clan who's a turtle clan whose turtles are strongholds that can move and are invulnerable and can do all sorts of, can participate in battles, but are otherwise invulnerable, which can be a very powerful thing indeed. But with the exception of a couple of monsters, or maybe an ability, that there is a monster called the Naga that can move around battle to battle, I believe. With the exception of her, there really isn't kind of any embedded mechanism that's going to make your forces move around from battle to battle or call forces in the midst of battles. So you'd have to buy those powers. It's worth speaking very quickly about how powers work in this game. There are monsters, just like in Blood Rage, you're going to recruit those monsters. There is, I guess, kind of the broad equivalent of the Blood Rage clan upgrades or whatnot. There are upgrades you can do for your daimyo, which is one of your stronger. I mean, all your figures in the game on the board, starting out in the game, all have the same amount of power. It's by buying these different marketplace kind of elements and cards that you're going to get kind of the symmetry, and you're going to make certain elements more powerful or not. Every clan starts with a daimyo that is immune to the taking hostage thing I talked about, and the betray action. They're also immune to that. But certain you can get upgrades that make your Daimyos more powerful, do different things, make your warriors more powerful. So there are monsters, there are kind of these types of upgrades you can do. There are things called virtues that are overall powers that you can take as well. That, for example, would get you extra VPs every time one of your figures dies. So you get double VPs for seppuku, for example. So that could be very powerful. And that's kind of almost the equivalent of the Loki strategy, the much beloved Loki Blood Rage strategy, where you're losing all the time and you're not winning any battles and you're just racking up the points. And usually virtues come in pairs. There's 2 virtues, and it's a rule of thumb in Rising Sun. And perhaps its greatest equivalency to Blood Rage is when you're buying things, don't let people have 2 of these virtues. It's never a good idea to let people double up on a good thing, because their strategies are already going to be tailored towards it. And as soon as that starts happening, it's going to be very difficult to slow them down later on. So there's virtues, there's these monsters, and there are kind of clan upgrades you can do. And then finally, there's certain upgrades you can take that trigger during the war phase. You can get a bunch of money or a bunch of Ronin or different things that happen right before the war phase starts. But no, in general, your forces are much more landlocked than they are in Blood Rage.
Okay, well, thanks for clearing that up. So it sounds like you've got a lot of asymmetry. You have this really interesting sort of alliance system, and then this gods system, which puts some pressure on you to try to decide how to best utilize your resources, which are, it sounds like, pretty much your warriors, the people you're going to put out either as priests or as warriors, in addition to your stronghold and your Diamo. And so there's a lot of really interesting choices to be made there. Is there a draft in Rising Sun of cards in the same way that there was in Blood Rage, or is the action selection sort of replacement for the draft? What would you say to that?
Great question. So no, it's not a draft in the sense that Blood Rage is a draft. What happens is, if you take the marketplace mandate, it's called the training mandate, actually. I was actually just looking it up because I was calling it shopping, purchasing. It's called training. And when you train, so each season is roughly equivalent to Blood Rage's ages, right? So every age had different cards, and they thematically get more powerful as the age approaches. It's much the same here. The spring age is kind of offers some of the more weaker monsters and weaker powers, and then you get your summer, and your fall gets progressively stronger. When you take that mandate, almost every other mandate, you go last because there's strategic benefits and you going last. For example, moving your people or recruiting or whatnot. You get to wait to see what everybody else is doing. Not so with the recruitment mandate. You get to go to that marketplace, that nice tableau of shopping carts ready for you, and you get first pick at it with a discount as well. And your partner will get a discount as well, although they will not go second right after you. Depends on turn order on your partner. But so that is there is no draft, so to speak, but there is that element of you're trying to get to be first to purchase these cards before other people do. I guess kind of like PAX Premier in a sense, or those kind of PAX tableau, marketplace tableau type of cards. But the marketplace does not refresh until you reach a new age or a new season in this case.
And all of these cards that you're speaking of, these are all sort of face up so everybody can see what it is you're taking, yes?
Exactly.
Okay, so then that's going to lead to the opportunity to kind of analyze what it is your opponents are trying to do based upon the cards that they're taking, yes?
Exactly. Remember when I said don't let people buy 2 virtues, for example. So if one guy's already bought the virtue where it's you get extra VP for every figure of yours that is killed, don't let him have the second one. And in a sense, that's the equivalent of hate drafting a little bit. But it's obviously you're not drafting. You're just purchasing and trying to be first to get to this one.
Okay, all right. So it replaces that draft mechanism with this market mechanism. So, all right, I think I got a good handle on that. Hate drafting, which you brought up, and the sort of keep the other player from winning, which is, as you very correctly, or I've said aptly several times. I think I'm going to go with astutely. As you astutely said, it kind of reminds you of Cole Wehrle games, where the table has to kind of keep everybody together in striking distance, because if you let someone begin to run away, you're not going to catch them. And I think that's very true of Cole's designs, definitely in a game like Root. If you let the vagabond just run around and never break his stuff, game's going to be over pretty darn quick, because that vagabond's just going to just race up the victory point chart, right? And it also reminds me of games like Tammany Hall. I don't know if you've ever had the chance to play that, which is a wonderful kind of pure political kind of Euro, where, again, somebody can get out to a lead, and if the table doesn't stop that person, it's going to be all over but the crying, very quickly in the game. So these are often seen, hate drafting, bash the leader, which are the kind of terms that people use. These are often seen as very derogatory terms in gaming. Why are these not derogatory things in the case of Rising Sun?
So I think that's a great question. So I think in all of these games, you mentioned Cole's designs like Root, you mentioned Blood Rage, which has been a critique of Blood Rage as well, right? You'll have final scores in Blood Rage that are wildly disparate. You can have somebody loop somebody else very easily. You can get somebody up 50 points and the third age hasn't even started. I've seen that happen before. What these designers, I think, are intending to do is for you to they really rely a lot on the human element of these games, and they're not relying on the games to just have artificial mechanical balancing mechanisms in there. So you have to. That's neither good nor bad. It's a feature. It's a design decision, much like any other design decision being made in a game. And sometimes it resonates with certain folks, and it doesn't with others. I will say that by and large, it will rely on multiple plays of a game, because much like Root or much like Blood Rage, you won't. And Rising Sun, this will happen as well. You won't see kind of what you need to do the first time around, or the way that you need to balance, or the decisions you need to make to kind of curtail everybody else from running away with it, until you play it maybe one time, or until you got halfway through your first game, in which case it may be a little bit too late. But I wouldn't say it's positive or negative. I'm just going to say it's a feature, and if you're going to like it or not once you play it. There's certain people really don't like that, and certainly it is I'll accept that it's very much a valid criticism being raised at Root or at PAX Premieres. Sometimes, it's a very kind of archaic board state that you're trying to figure out who's ahead or who isn't, and what do I need to do to stop that person from running away with that faction or whatnot. It's a kind of the antithesis of a lot of Euro game mechanism designs, which strive for kind of maintaining balance above all costs. That's not these games. Now, I think Rising Sun is a little bit less than, say, even Blood Rage, because the game has a fairly complicated kind of board state to assess when you go to the battle phase. There's a ton of different battlegrounds. There's a lot of money being spent, sometimes battles between 3 or 4 different people. So it's pretty hard to mechanically calculate, okay, for sure that person's going to win this and that, so I got to stop them from doing that. And there's just so much variety that comes with the God phase in the marketplace. It's impossible to take control of everything. But it will be there, and you will have 2 or 3 people vastly ahead of everybody else, like 30 points ahead. And you might see by the second season that you just simply very likely don't have a chance in this game. And this is going to be more of a learning experience for you. I will accept that that's probably not excellent for that first thing, but I will say that the game is no less compelling for that. And I think there's still a lot of decisions to be made, even if you find yourself in that scenario. There's still a lot of things you get to do, and it's also fairly hard to king make in this game. But again, because the game state's fairly complicated, you can do it. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's a little harder to do than, say, I find even Root, where Root you can have some very simple things of, I'm going to hurt this person here right now, and I know it'll give the victory to this other person, so maybe I won't do anything else. But if I don't do anything, that person's just going to win no matter what. There's less of that in Rising Sun, I find.
Well, that's good, because I've always found king making to be the biggest of those kinds of problems that pop up in these type of games. I like the way that you described it, that it's an extra element for the players to put their stamp on the game rather than the game sort of artificially controlling the parameters of how well a player can do or how far a player can fall behind in any given time Now you have this idea again in this design and others where the players really have to police the table themselves, which I think can make for some really compelling decisions. But like you said, there is the danger of player irrelevance, which I've talked about before on the show, where a player can feel so kind of out of the running that they feel like there's nothing that they can do, and even though they're not eliminated, they feel sort of disenfranchised from the game, if that makes any sense.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that happen in my plays of Blood Rage. And, again, like you said, it's not necessarily the fault of the game, but it is something I think that people should be aware. So I'm grateful that you took the time to explain that so well, because it is something that will be very off-putting to some people, but other people will view that as kind of a challenge to try to kind of steer the ocean liner, or, pick your metaphor, wrestle the dragon or whatever, and try to see if they can figure out how to control what seems to be very uncontrollable. So that's great. So now, to me, the natural follow-up to all of this then is, do you feel that this game offers more of a sort of a strategic workout for your brain or a tactical workout for your brain? Because I have my own kind of thoughts about Blood Rage and where that game falls, but what would you say about Rising Sun?
So I always find those questions a little hard to answer, because sometimes I get a little muddied up myself. But what exactly is tactics versus strategies in certain games like this? If we're going to put it on a spectrum, then certainly I would say Rising Sun has more of a strategic long-term element in it than, say, Blood Rage, where so much of it depends on what cards you're going to see, and you can have a strategy in place, but if you don't get the cards in the second age or the third age that match up with it, you're simply not going to. You might have been leaning Loki, or might have been leaning leader type of strategies, but you just don't get cards that vibe for it. So you have to kind of adapt and shift very quickly. Rising Sun, due to its nature of the marketplace and the nature of there's more control, and often there's multiple of the cards of some of these key cards, you definitely have more of an opportunity to pursue long-term strategies than you would in Blood Rage. But it's still quite tactical, because the game state can change quite a bit, and some of the things you're trying to do might change. Some people may take over some of those gods that you're trying to take control over to get those benefits, or they might get ahead of you and purchase one of those cards that you were really relying on that was going to be the linchpin of your monster strategy, and all of a sudden you can't do it because that one card is missing. That certainly can happen, but less so than Blood Rage.
Yeah, I found Blood Rage to be very, very fluid and very, very chaotic. Right. And to me, that was okay because it fit the theme. Like, to me, that sort of world of sort of Viking mythology and that sort of loosely historical idea of Vikings raiding and pillaging and all this, it really worked for me, right? It really was something that I kind of thought, okay, the chaos that I'm seeing in the game really sort of, in my mind, is harmonious with what I imagine from this particular setting. And so it seems like with Rising Sun that Eric Lang managed to pull the same thing off, because it almost sounds like it's more of a disciplined, long-term planning, strategic kind of approach to the game than Blood Rage, which was much more fast, kind of freeform. I kind of always thought of Blood Rage, and it's primarily because of that drafting, as being a very freeform kind of an experience. It was really hard for me to settle on a particular strategy in Blood Rage, because if I got these awesome cards that let me do something that wasn't really what I was planning on doing, I'm not going to pass them up. I'm going to use them. I'm going to, as you said, I'm going to adapt. I'm going to shift my strategy, and I'm going to have some fun with these cards, because these are really going to mess up somebody's day. Right. Whereas it sounds like in Rising Sun, because of how that works, there's a little more control. And so I think, even though I haven't played it, I'd be curious what listeners would say. It sounds like I would be in agreement with you that it seems like it offers maybe some more strategic possibilities and not quite as kind of chaotic. So
Right.
you
And that
brought
fits
up.
the setting, and that fits the theme, right? Like you
Mhm.
mentioned, if you think thematically about, we're relying on historical tropes here to an extent, but if you think thematically about, Viking warfare and Nordic warfare and kind of pillaging and going all over the place and kind of chaotic, that's an element of chaos in there.
Mhm.
Whereas what this game's trying to emulate is more of a, leaders of nations, shoguns of their clans that are trying to lead their clan into victory. So it's more deliberate. It's a little more strategic. It's a little more, there's a tea ceremony phase. So you're not going to find a
Yeah.
tea ceremony phase in Blood Rage. They're not stopping
Right.
for tea. So,
No,
there's
no.
more of an elegant,
Maybe mead,
yeah,
but
exactly.
but not tea. No, I agree with that.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me ask you a question. Then you brought up I've heard you say a couple of times that there has been some controversy. You can call it political correctness or whatever over some of the elements in the game. You mentioned the sort of liberties that are taken with sort of Japanese history, culture, which I am by no means an expert of. And then you also talked about the seppuku or seppuku. I don't know how you say it. I think it's seppuku, but I could be wrong. The idea of ritual suicide, right? Which
Right.
is, it is better to die than to be dishonored, if I understand that correctly, which I could very well be completely off base about that. With the Vikings, I had read more. I had a little bit a better of an understanding. For example, to die of old age as a Viking was not really thought of to be a good thing. I mean, that meant you were probably too cautious in your life. You weren't, taking chances. You weren't taking risks. You weren't living to the fullest if you became old and infirm.
Right.
Chances were, the mythology itself and some of the beliefs kind of said to die in battle was, the greatest thing that you could possibly hope for, right? With the sort of Japanese culture, it was my understanding that seppuku would be something that would be done rather than accept a humiliation, right, or a dishonor. But I am kind of curious about, number one, if I'm right, and I'm hoping that somebody listening will know more than me, and possibly you do, Miguel. I'm not trying to say that you don't, but I know I don't. And then the idea of, would that really be something that would happen? Like, would you have an army just sort of mass commit suicide? Like, that sounded a little bit off to me, and I don't have anything to base that on other than kind of my gut feeling. And then the other thing you mentioned were those liberties kind of taken. What's been your impression of the comments that people have made? Is it just much ado about nothing? Hey, people, we're just talking about a game here. Or, do you feel that there's something to it? What are your impressions about all that?
Well, I'm going to, so there are two broad categories of kind of controversy. There's two incidents really that revolve around, that I recall, around controversies of Rising Sun. The first is simple. It's more of a funny thing, really, than anything. It's more comical. So there is a Kickstarter monster, which is a monkey god, which was sold only if you backed it on Kickstarter. You would get this extra monster. And it's called Kotahi. And what happened was that a 19-year-old from New Zealand or one of his friends had apparently edited a section on Japanese mythology in Wikipedia and included his name in there. I think his last name is Kotai, if I'm not mistaken. And so when I guess the Rising Sun group, Simon, perhaps Eric Lang, or perhaps somebody on his team was doing research into the mythology for them to include in their monsters, they included Kotahi in there because Kotahi was in the Wikipedia page. And yes, it seems like they didn't do that much more research beyond the Wikipedia page. But you know what? That's, you're trying to find names. I get it. I'm not unsympathetic to Simon here. You're trying to find names, and you're trying to open, to the pantheon of Japanese mythology, so you can include all these different monsters with different mechanics and different things. Mm-hmm. And you come across this Kotahi name, and they're not historians, they're game developers, and this is very much a fantasy depiction of Japan. And in fact, they conflate provinces with cities, with regions of Japan in times. Kyoto versus some of the other places that they have are not accurate to what they would be at the time, or the kind of designation that they are. I think they just call them regions, but some are cities and some are provinces or whatnot. So this is not this is not a simulation like GMT simulations or anything like that. This is classic CMON, dudes on a map, fantasy, with a Japanese mythology, Japanese feudal twist to it. So that was one of the controversies. So people made, everybody had a good laugh at CMON's expense there, but I think it's fairly harmless at the end of the day. I believe they sent the real Kotahi a copy of Rising Sun signed by Eric Lang, and everybody was happy.
Okay.
Right. The Rising Sun thing. So the seppuku thing is a little more. I think that's an entire episode to talk about, and that gets into things around depictions of warfare or depictions of more unsavory or morally ambiguous elements in games. Everything from classic warfare to Letters from Whitechapel, I believe, right, where you're portraying one player Jack the Ripper, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So there were some criticisms of the portrayal of seppuku in this game as rewarding the players for committing ritual suicide. And I'm no Japanese historian. I'll leave it at that. That seppuku is ritualistic suicide practiced originally by the samurai caste. Later on in Japanese society, different, common folks would have done it to atone for atonement purposes or for restoring honor purposes. I'll leave it at that. I'm no historian, and I definitely don't want angry emails and tweets over to you or me due to misassessing what this is. But I was less fussed about it, but I do understand. I thought it was an interesting conversation around, the depiction of these kinds of elements in board games. I was a little perplexed that this was the one out of the cornucopia of things that are abstracted out or inputted into mechanics in board games, much like Letters of Whitechapel, where you are Jack the Ripper, and which is a fairly horrible thing to do, down to GMT's more modern takes on modern conflicts like Labyrinth or like A Distant Plane, right, which are fairly, at the time, even when they released it, that's a current conflict with all its messiness and all the geopolitical and ideological issues that are going on there. That somebody would take offense to this specific depiction, I thought was surprising. And I don't mean to get into whataboutism, like, well, what about this, or that? It's just, but I can't help but do it because of all the gamut of things out there, and even just in the board gaming world, never mind the video game world or other things, of all the things that are abstracted out and mechanically put into games. I was just a little surprised that this struck a nerve with some folks. But yeah, so there were some discussions on places like Reddit or Board Game Geek around, the appropriateness of depicting seppuku in this manner.
Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts about that because, I've always been fascinated with difficult themes in board games. I actually did an episode with Joel Eddy about it a couple of years ago where we kind of tackled some games. There was a game that came out that he was very sort of passionate about in his opinions. That was about Alzheimer's patients trying to get out of the nursing home. And, he just thought that was kind of very tasteless. And it was also at the time that a game called Lap Dance came out that was kind of depicting that sort of world and business. And, and it was also at the same time that games like Freedom, the Underground Railroad came out, which is, dealing with an extremely difficult issue of slavery and the abolition of slavery, and trying to kind of put yourself in the position of having to calculate what are acceptable losses and understanding that these cubes actually mean something. These are people. And I think that, in some ways, I'm very glad that people are having these conversations to just kind of say, hey, if you're going to put this in here, understand it's going to touch a nerve with some people, whether it be how you handle colonialism or how you handle slavery or how you handle, gender issues or depictions of, different people in the art direction of games and things of that nature. So I think these are all good conversations to have, but it seems like your argument is pretty much the same way I do, the same argument that I usually kind of end up falling back on, which is if it serves the purpose of the game and it's not tasteless, then, I'm probably just going to roll with it. And, if someone asks a question about it, then, we can have that conversation. And, by the time we're done recording this episode, because of, who I am, I'll probably do a little digging myself. Hopefully not on Wikipedia, but I'll do a little bit of digging to try to find out, more about this. Was there ever an example where an entire fighting force decided, death before dishonor? Or does this whole concept have nothing to do with honor? Or, I don't know anything about it. And both of us, I think, have very rightly and for our own protection gone on record of saying we're not authorities in this, but it is an interesting thing. As games continue to be developed in different places and times and periods, there's going to be baggage that comes with them. And that baggage can be all sorts of context that gets pulled along when you're doing a game like Navajo Wars, or you're doing a game that involves these sort of cultural elements like we're talking about. So I appreciate your willingness to kind of tackle that and stick yourself out there a little bit, because, as you said, neither of us are looking to engender any anger from anybody or to upset anybody, but I felt it was important enough that I at least wanted to kind of mention it, because it did kind of strike a nerve with me as soon as I heard you saying it. And you had said that there had been a little controversy. So the other thing with, the particular god and the misuse of the name and all that, that's unfortunate. But again, it's one of those things that, again, from my perspective, like you, probably not that big of a deal. But then again, you never know. It's anytime you're playing in cultural waters of someone else, you have to be aware that you could end up upsetting someone. Like, I'm thinking of another game. What is it? Raiatea, and it was this game that was set in a sort of Pacific Island place, but the depiction on the cover of the game was of a Maori warrior, and the culture had nothing to do with the Maori, and people were like, you didn't even take the time to understand that there's a difference between these people? I mean, that's like a little careless, and so these things will kind of jump up and bite you if you're not careful as a publisher or a designer. But, like you said, it certainly was part of Japanese culture. And so it's not misplaced. We're not talking about inserting something from a different culture into this game. We're just kind of talking about whether or not that cultural element is serving the game in the capacity that the designer wanted to, and that as the audience are looking at and saying, does this feel right to us? And I don't have any real answer or reason why I'm okay with the victory points for dead warriors going to Valhalla, but I kind of did the whole when I heard about the army just deciding, we're out, and seppuku, and that's over. They're both doing mechanically exactly the same thing. You're getting rewarded in game terms for your units dying, in battle. So it really is kind of the same thing. And I'm questioning myself why I was like okay with it in one instance, but I question it in the other. So again, to me, those are the things that always lead you to maybe dig a little deeper and investigate and try to figure out for yourself, rather than someone like us telling other people what they should think. This would be an opportunity for people to kind of learn a little bit themselves and decide how they feel about it themselves. So, does that sound fair enough as a summary of that?
Oh, absolutely. And I do want to stress that I think it's an important conversation to have, and it's a fascinating conversation to have. And I think one of the reasons why probably it kind of engendered this kind of conversation was because of very topical contemporary arguments around, or discussions really around mental health and suicide and whatnot. And I think there's a little bit of reflection of the current issues we're having right now in North America, certainly Western society, if not globally, around suicide and mental health, and around kind of this depiction of suicide, even if it is largely a historical artifact in the way it's construed. And I want to stress once again, Rising Sun is in no way accurate. It is a comic book fantasy fever dream of what feudal Japan would have been. It is not. It is nothing. There's not a lick of accurateness other than maybe there was a country, Japan, and
right.
there were shoguns and there were battles for supremacy and for control of areas of that
Right.
country. But that's about it. The rest of it, it's a hodgepodge of different influences, different eras of the country. So it's very much all over the place.
I love that description. It's a fever dream. I don't think I've ever heard that one before, but that's really neat. Because yes, when you kind of you're in that feverish state, things get in a dreamlike way, kind of moshed together that they wouldn't necessarily in your wake in your more lucid states. And I think that's a really neat way to put that. It's a fever dream of Japanese culture and game design and all this stuff kind of moshed together. So thanks for sharing your perspectives about that. So okay, the next thing I want to ask you about is the idea. You've already kind of touched already on player count. You've told us that you feel the game needs at least 4 because of the alliance system. And because of just the sort of interesting nature of the choices and more competition and things of that nature. So you've already kind of covered that for us. But what would you say about replayability with this game? How do you feel this game holds up to repeated play? Does it offer surprises after the 5th, the 10th, the 15th play? Or do you begin to find patterns and certain strategies, a la the Loki strategy and Blood Rage, that people will sort of settle into? And then as a piggyback on that question about replayability is, do you feel that there are sort of overpowered sort of strategies that people who know the game can deploy?
Great question. So this is where Rising Sun truly shines, is with the element of replayability. And this is where one of those things, even the base game, if you just bought it in retail, it already has quite a bit of replayability. Remember I mentioned those gods at the top that you fight over? There's a variety of them. So those are different every time. And if you had the Kickstarter, then you're in for a cornucopia of different options, for monsters for the marketplace, different clans with different asymmetrical powers. Never mind the expansion. There's 2 expansion Chinese clans that have an entirely different, exclusive to them, pantheon of Chinese gods that they can tap into and purchase that no one else can. So there is a wealth of different kind of replayable elements that are going to feel very different, and strategies you can pursue. Certainly there's things that you can, especially if you played Blood Rage or other Eric Lang designs, you'll quickly see, that virtue where the guy dies, where you get a VP if a figure of yours dies every time. Hey, that's pretty powerful. Why you mean I can get 2 points every time I commit seppuku with my guys? Okay, so there's something I can do. So that's a very approachable strategy right off the bat. And it's the one that's, I'd say, is closely analogous to the Loki strategy. The last time I played this game, I pursued a strategy of basically god control, because there's a couple gods that gave me, there was one god in play that gave me power for strongholds. So I was basically cranking out as many strongholds as I could and trying to get 4 VP every time those god phases came up, for around 12 VP per season by the time I got going, which can be very powerful itself. I was very much in contention towards, I think I lost that game to a player who pursued very an area control strategy, but I was dominating right up until the very end without ever having won a single battle, I believe. So again, you can pursue different things. You can pursue excellence in battle and supremacy on the battlefield for the area control element of it, and find the right cards in the marketplace to help you pursue that, or pursue more of a god strategy, a hybrid of both, certain crazy combos, because much like, again, classic Eric Lang, there's certain cards and certain monsters out there that can really be abused. There's one monster that every time he enters a region, for whatever reason, you can steal VPs from any other player that's present in that region. So if you partner that, for example, there's a god in play that every time the god phase comes up, you can move one of your figures. So partner that up, and now you're bouncing around this demon in the last phase and just siphoning off honor and VPs from all these other players, and you're quickly going to become the least favorite person on the table after a couple rounds of that. So there are, I think, beginner strategies. There are more nuanced strategies and expert strategies, certainly. And the game is nothing if not replayable. I'm still learning it. It's easily one of the games I've played, I think, the most. We live in the cult of the new. I've said I've played this game probably between 15 and 20 times, which is a lot for me. And I'm still learning it, and I'm looking forward to playing it. We have a convention coming up here in Toronto, Breakout Con, and we always have it's been a tradition now that we always play a game of 5 players, going now, I think, 3 or 4 years. So looking forward to getting that in once again.
Fantastic. Since you mentioned your local con, can you tell us a little bit more about it for people who might be listening but might not be aware of it?
Sure. So Breakout Con has been a part of Toronto's gaming scene now for quite a few years. It is a small but mighty convention. It is the biggest in Toronto, I believe, in terms of dedicated just board gaming. Thanks, certainly probably the biggest in Ontario. And it's a lot of fun. It is held at a downtown hotel here in Toronto. A lot of dedicated gaming space. I call it primary. There's a lot of other elements. There's a lot of RPG elements as well, and RPG events, guest speakers. I believe Eric Lang's been invited before. There's an auction, a bring and buy kind of auction as well, and a ton of different events. It's a lot of fun. It happens every year right around this time, in April, and March and April, I believe. And if anybody's in the area in Ontario or nearby, nearby the United States, definitely come by, because it's very gamer friendly. It's very fun, and there is a lot of gaming space for people to get together and play their favorite games.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that, and I'm sure that people listening who might be nearby, upstate New York and other places, might be interested in going to that. And I'm always happy to plug conventions, especially ones that I don't know, as a great way to get to, as you said, meet some new people, make some new friends, play some great games, and have a wonderful time. So thanks for that. So before we kind of draw this to a close, is there anything that you really kind of were saying to yourself, man, I really want to talk about this, and you haven't had a chance to share that with us yet? Do you have any sort of other points or thoughts that you wanted to make regarding not Blood Rage, but Rising Sun? I'm not going to make that mistake again. I've been very good recently. So, yeah, anything else that you can say, Miguel?
Well, I just think it's very interesting. So the thing I love about this hobby is how designer sensibilities and kind of like their DNA gets infused in these games. And Rising Sun is very much an Eric Lang game. You can see that through and through. And you see that lineage up from Chaos in the Old World to Blood Rage and Rising Sun. And now the upcoming to complete the trilogy, of course, is Ankh, which will be set in Egyptian mythological times. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Eric Lang's coming up with for that design. But I do think Rising Sun is although very popular, like you said, great reviews. It generated, I think, over 4 million on Kickstarter, which is right up there. One of the top earners, definitely in the hobby, and that's amongst some really big earners. I do think it's still quite misunderstood to a large extent. It's not. There's no such thing as a perfect design. This is not a perfect design, but I think it's incredibly appealing due to its combination of Puerto Rico style action selection and this kind of organic alliance system and fluidity that kind of permeates the entire design. It's just really fun, and I encourage people that have any kind of interest in area control, dudes on a map style of games to give this one a shot, because it's quite interesting.
Well, I want to thank you for agreeing to come on the show and share your thoughts about this, because apparently after listening to you for the past hour discuss this with me, I was really off base when I said that kind of Blood Rage and Rising Sun were basically the same game. It sounds like they're very, very different in so many of the ways that you've already kind of discussed and illuminated. So I'm hoping that, maybe, as you said, this will encourage people who haven't had a chance to play it, myself included, give them a little bit of inspiration to give it a shot. It does have a great rating, but as you said, I think there's a lot of people like me who are kind of like, it's just a reskin of Blood Rage, and I'm more interested in the Viking theme, and I'll just let that one go. It's just another big minis thing, and a lot of money to spend. I'm not going to do it, because that was kind of honestly my thought process. I was like, oh look, it's it's another Eric Lang game. It's kind of dudes on a map. Look, there's the huge minis of the monsters. Yeah. Okay, I've seen this before, and I just kind of let it go.
Yeah.
And some of the sort of initial sort of talking points about it, we're always kind of referencing it in relation to Blood Rage, and so I kind of rapidly formed the opinion that they're kind of the same game, I guess, and turns out I was completely wrong. So I appreciate the fact that you reached out, and I'm always happy. I was very serious about that when I said that it's the people who come on and contribute that keep the show going. And so I want to thank you, Miguel, for agreeing to be on the show tonight and share your thoughts about the Eric Lang game of Rising Sun.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love talking about this hobby, and it's great to have a good discussion about games, their provenance, everything about it. So it's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much. So if you have been intrigued by the discussion of this game, go and check out your local game store, or perhaps your friendly online game store, whether that be gamesurplus.com. I think the last time I was there, I saw they had one or two copies left of Rising Sun that were on the shelf the last time I checked. So regardless of where you go, see if you can maybe track down a copy if you've been intrigued by what Miguel has had to share. I know I'm going to be looking forward to an opportunity to have a chance to play. So I want to say thanks to everybody out there for listening, and have a great night. Okay, I'm going to end the broadcast. And